This place is also a kind of a battleground each year on the 8th and the 9th of May, which is the victory day over Nazism, because also in a physical sense you have here usually several demonstrations which are opposing each other. And in this sense, this is really the main issue for the memory politics here, because what you can basically see in regard to the physical locus of the park, but also a symbolic locus as ideology, is that you have here the overlapping of several discourses, which basically are the commemoration of the Soviet Ukraine on the one hand, secondly, which is represented by the tomb of the unknown soldier, secondly, the nationalistic discourse, which commemorates the Holodomors of the 20s and the 30s in Ukraine, represented by the Holodomor monument over there. Thirdly, also, the discourse of the Second World War, which is, as we inherited it from the Soviet times, is called usually the Great Patriotic War. And all these discourses overlap on this day, but also in this space. Being here, we are basically in the core of the conflictuality inscribed in the current Ukrainian memory politics. Because first of all, this memory politics that is also conducted by the Ukrainian state has been always a kind of nation-centered, not state-centered. So that's why it's probably very much connected to the roots of the historiographic culture, which and very typical for the Eastern Europe, which is coming from the end of the 19th century, from the tradition of Romanticism. But the biggest challenge still is that it's very hard to inscribe into the memory politics the others, not non-Ukrainians. So the others in the memory politics discourse usually appear either as enemies or as opponents. So we can basically see that this is very much lacking, the presence of the other within one national memory discourse here in this country. But also on the other hand, the problem is that in the mainstream public discourse, not so much in the academic field, but publicly in the media, the history, especially of the 20th century, and memory such, is somehow owned by right-wing consensus. So that's why you have these different competing narratives also here, because on the one hand, this place of commemoration of the unknown soldier from the Second World War is coming from the Soviet tradition. On the other hand, you have a newly appeared nationalistic narrative which opposes that, also in a very physical form, because they are placed in one spot. But on the other hand, we have also taken into account that these commemorative places from the Soviet times are currently being used also by the Kremlin propaganda as a kind of places of Russian interests. So that's why this battle within the memory politics is somehow unavoidable. The Soviet and socialist past of Ukraine is currently in the mist, speaking literally and also metaphorically. But as for the city of Kyiv, but also in regard to the most of the cities of contemporary Ukraine, they were shaped very much in the Soviet times. So basically, if we speak historically and architecturally about the city of Kyiv, we have basically here two main important architectural phases of the city. The first one is Baroque, and the second one is a socialist realist one. So basically now this part of the past is being denied and neglected and is very much externalized. The current Ukrainian common sense is pretending that the Soviet past didn't exist here, or rather that we were just victims of that time, that the socialism came here in the form of occupation, that it was not us, we were just victims. This discourse of victimology is actually shaping the current ideology very much, especially in terms of memory politics. But the problem is that basically Kyiv as the city and the whole Ukraine as a country were initiated and started in its contemporary sense, especially in the 20s, in the socialist times, because that was the start of mass education, industrialization, urbanization, which created the city in the current shape. And if we are trying to neglect that, we are just somehow, that's the process as if we are looking at ourselves in the mirror and we don't like what we see. We are frightened with what we see. And you need to have really a kind of a self-hatred on such a scale that seeing that you are starting to disfigure, to attack yourself. Trying to neglect and deny the socialist past of this country is basically the same as shooting yourself in your knee. And without that, it's just impossible to go ahead. This memorial spot is really one of the main symptoms of the current ideology in contemporary Ukraine, because what you can basically see that apart from the tomb of the unknown soldier that you can see behind me, there is also a monument to Holodomor. And interestingly enough, you can see here somehow the battle or the struggle between different historical narratives which are developing just in front of our eyes. Because some 12, 13 years ago, when one of the former presidents of Ukraine was Yushchenko, there was a kind of a start of the Holodomor remembrance campaign. And the authorities of Ukraine decided to install the memorial to Holodomor into the Park of Eternal Glory. So you can somehow see how these two narratives are competing together, being put into one place.